All right, I'm going to start with we'll see who arrives. Some people arrive late because of work. Thanks for coming along, guys. Nice to see you all. And we are pushing ahead with the questions. So let's get into a bit of discussion. Can Zoomers, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Good. Yeah. By the way, Zoomers, I'm looking into. Hi, Jack. I'm just researching microphones to try to solve the sound problem for you fellas on Zoom, because the feedback I'm getting, and when I'm watching some of the little bits of the video back, I haven't watched it all, but the bits where people are speaking from the class, it's a bit low, isn't it? So
how do we get those what do you call
omnidirectional microphone? That's exactly what I'm looking for. Yeah.
We all sort of chip in.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
It wasn't that expensive. I mean,
right.
Some are expensive.
Yeah, that's right. There's a range, and I'm looking for something that will sort of be
70,
cheap enough. That's right,
yeah,
around about $70. So I think we'll probably cover it with our usual chip in over time. That's right. So hopefully in the next week or two I'll have something. I'm just looking, you get a million different possibilities. So just exploring that. Yeah. So Zoomers, you'll probably get hopefully things will be a bit clearer in the next little while, and so will the video recording. Yeah. Okay, so look, we've been discussing Mary Heath's article. We'll continue today. We covered number 3. I was looking at we're looking up to number 4. Her upbringing, she said, it made the possibility of critical thinking invisible to me. Maybe we should find that. And my question is, it's kind of an important quotation. Why? Let's just find the section document. Page 1, 2, 3. I can't remember what paragraph I just said. What paragraph did I say? Last one, there it is. Cultural disapproval. See the title, cultural disapproval? Do we want to have a read? Jack, have you got that in front of you? Or otherwise, Keiko, okay, you've got it in front of you. Yeah. All right. But if everybody can get up that, probably it's helpful to have the PDF, Mary Heath's PDF, and the Microsoft Word document.
In the group.
Yeah. So Keiko, have a read.
Yeah. Sometimes the information or tools needed to engage in critical thinking are not readily available. I grew up in environments where I received a lot of training designed to persuade or oblige me to obey rather than to question. I know I am not the only person who has lived in context where mostly inquiry is actively discouraged and passivity is rewarded. This kind of training didn't lead me to perceive critical thinking as inappropriate. It made the possibility of thinking critically invisible to me. In times when I have found myself fearful to follow my own thoughts to their conclusions, and even more fearful to share those thoughts or act on them, I have tried to figure out what resources my culture offers for critical thinking. I have asked myself where the critical thinkers in my culture are in history, in the world of the imagination, and in the present, and what the cost and benefits of the cultural predisposition not to question have been. In every culture, there are people who resist passivity, whether in large ways or in small ways, whether in quiet, subtle ways or in overt public ways. This may ask a
Oh,
question.
sorry, they may ask.
They may ask questions or offer critique through poetry, music, art, correspondence, public performance, running for parliament, community organizing, or revolutionary action. When I am participating in a social change project, which is being called an Australian in the media, I think of these people and of friends and co-activists who care about the issues I care about.
Good, thanks. Yeah, and as I mentioned, she's pretty involved in various social change projects, and they get critiqued in the media, criticised. And as you can see there, she says sometimes they get called un-Australian. Yeah, un-Australian, like Extinction Rebellion,
Oh.
for example.
The day before yesterday, I read a piece of news.
Remember, just for Zoomers, people, Shana, speak up, everyone. Thanks.
Recently, I read a piece of news, and it's about the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott,
Mm-hmm.
and he was fined. He was fined $500 due to he didn't wear a mask, and
Yes.
because he whispered to the person he talked, he said, "Shit, I don't have mask with me," but he made a lot of excuses or something, and then he said that the whistleblower and Australia.
Right.
So that's
Okay.
but just now, I think because I just read their translation, Chinese version.
Right. Yeah.
But I think maybe that's an Australian.
Yeah, right. Some interesting expressions here. Due to, we need to say, due to the fact that,
Due to the reason?
not due to the reason, due to the fact, this is the reason, due to the fact that he was, whatever, not wearing his mask. But you need that, the fact that, due to the fact that. Just think of the whole structure. Due to the fact that, due to the fact that. 5-word collocation, pretty useful to just, when you're giving a reason for something, a cause.
Due to the fact.
Yeah.
Last week I noticed it's hard to see that one if that still smaller picture on there. So can you put that one on the middle instead of
Hang on, if I can I
mean
Open a
it's
new
at the
word.
moment here,
yeah.
but that one can go there. So in the middle, is it possible?
Can I make this
Yeah.
showing that's
Yeah,
there?
yeah, so-
No, I don't think
Okay.
so.
Why not?
There, isn't it showing now?
Let me check.
Oh, hang on.
Just
What if I
open
know?
it,
If
the
I
word.
put it on,
Just
why
write
isn't it?
on the word.
It's on that. I'd have to stop sharing. Okay, if I stop sharing, but then why isn't it going? Yeah.
You can put in chat and show the screen. Right in the
I'm
chat
not sure why.
and then show the screen.
In chat.
For everyone. Chat. And then share the screen on this big TV screen. Right in the chat. Chatting and then show on the screen.
Well, I can go to chat, but I don't know what menu I then select.
Or if you click on view and then just swap it, can you do that? Well, I guess I can do it when I watch it.
Yeah, Hilly, I was trying to do that. Go to view. Yeah. Where are my view options? View. Speaker. I would have thought speak or gallery.
Click a view.
Full screen. Hang on. That doesn't do it. speaker. See, I'm speaking, but it's for some reason it's staying on Hilly.
It's weird.
Hilly, what if
But
I just mute you just to see if it changes? Well, I don't know why it doesn't change. That's weird. I don't know. Don't know why it's doing that. I tell you what I'll do. Rather than use that, I'll use the Microsoft Word. I think sometimes I'll draw a diagram. I can't draw diagrams. I'm not good enough with my skills to do that with Microsoft Word. So what I'll try to do.
Used to be okay, wasn't when
Did it?
yes, you were doing English class. I didn't have any trouble.
Right.
You were in the
I
middle.
think that's because when I was doing the English class, I was using a camera and not Zoom. Might have been that.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so what I'll do, thanks for the feedback, what we'll do is create a new document. Now, Zoomers, are you seeing the screen where if I type whistleblower? Zoomers, can you, what are you seeing at the moment? Oh no, you're not seeing that one. Okay. I think you are now, aren't you? You're seeing whistleblower?
yeah.
Yeah,
Can you
good.
please look at my phone?
Ah, right. Okay, you got Zoom on there. Oh my God, this is confusing. All right. By the way, so you've got to say due to the fact that.
Due to the fact
Yeah. All right. And a whistleblower, someone who, and then we say, you know, they blows the whistle. And some of you may know that, but I'll just put the important preposition on someone or something. You blow the whistle on it. So it's like, you know, an umpire. When they blow the whistle, everything stops and everybody pays attention to the wrong thing that somebody's done. You know, they say, oh, that's a foul or whatever, right? So blowing the whistle is you're pointing out what's wrong. You're trying to stop what everyone's doing. And yeah, so we have, in this case, somebody blew the whistle on Tony Abbott not wearing his mask. And he said, that's an interesting anecdote, Shana, because he said, that's un-Australian. Now, it's interesting because if there'd be a whole lot of people who, if they got whistle blown on, if you can say that, I don't know, I've never heard it, but they would not say, oh, that's un-Australian. Where does this comment come from politically? Again, language and politics, language and critical thinking. If you hear somebody say that, consciously or unconsciously, where are they coming from politically? If they say, oh, that's un-Australian.
that must be right.
They're coming from the right. Yeah, and it's not an accident. Tony Abbott's very right wing, right? Because patriotism and nationalism and all that kind of thing is very right wing, right? So in their mind, if you want to critique somebody, you say, oh, that you're un-Australian, you don't belong to our nation. It's very nationalistic, and which is associated with the right. And at some point, we're going to need to just, I think, you know, many of us here are clear on left and right, but not all. So we'll do some stuff fairly soon, actually, on left and right, because that's pretty important. That shapes the landscape of thinking. Hey, Heinz. No worries. It's that's the way it is with this class, because people are finishing work and coming in. That's all right. Good. So welcome, Gina. G'day. And so that comment, thank you for reading that whole thing, Keiko. And she said, when I'm participating in social change, like, for example, some environmental thing, as I mentioned, Mary Heath, the writer, the professor of law at Flinders University, is a social activist for various social change things, campaigns. One of them is Extinction Rebellion. She was training people in non-violent, still is, I think, non-violent direct action. Direct action is where you actually go and physically intervene in something. You know, you stick your hands, glue them to the street, or you know, stand in front of Parliament, or you go on strike, or you know, anything like that. That's what we call direct action. It's an important collocation in, what would we call it? The language of social change. So when she's called un-Australian, or the project is, she thinks of these people, the people she's mentioned. In every culture, there are people who resist, and she mentions various forms. Can take lots and lots of different forms, kind of artistic forms, philosophical, etc. Now, that's there are quite a lot happening in this paragraph, and there's a few quotes we need to discuss. The one here is where it says, the question we're on, this kind of training didn't lead me to perceive critical thinking as inappropriate. It made the possibility of thinking critically invisible to me. She's talking about her background generally, isn't it? Where she grew up in contexts where mostly inquiry is actively discouraged and passivity is rewarded. Passivity in thinking. So it's not like, oh, that's inappropriate, don't say that, don't think that. It's more like, it's just not there. So any thoughts about that? Like, does that does that ring a bell for you? Ring a bell, an expression, meaning does it echo? Does it resonate? And like, so a metaphor of a bell ringing, right? Does it make the same sound in your memory, where certain things are just invisible?
Invisible or unconcerned?
When you say unconcerned, Keiko, can you explain unconcerned?
Well, when I grew up, I was in a small city quite away from Tokyo.
Yeah.
And in my place, so there wasn't, might be, well, invisible or unconcerned or indifferent, or maybe there were certain racism or not in my own hometown, because most of the Japanese one race, no actual racism.
True.
And say socioeconomic difference, not much there. Of course, some are rich, some are a bit poorer, but it wasn't really make a gap between us. So, but there were some sort of difference, or gender discrimination could be somewhere in Japan, not in my area. But I wasn't really concerned or invisible to me. Just, I think one reason for that is, say, now we can have lots of resources like internet, social media. So you can have lots of information you can get. But when I grew up, I was young, just a newspaper or TV, TV there, but one national network and one local TV, which mainly present sort of local events. Presented.
I'm just going to try this little technique for Zoomers. Hey, Zoomers, look, you can see who's here. We've got a small group today. Others about to arrive. But can you see people? Yeah. Right, I'm going to just have to keep my eye on that.
It's really nice to see them. I just always wonder who is talking and what they look like.
It's really nice. Thank you, John. It was a good idea. Thanks.
You're sick of looking at me, I know. The problem is I'm going to lose. The reason I didn't do it before is I've got so many cables sticking out of this computer. So I've got to figure out a way of controlling this, but yeah, ideally we will continue to do this. Yeah, so Keiko, you were saying that when you grew up, there was a sort of invisibility because of the sort of telecommunications and connection with the
Yeah.
outside world.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was quite comfortable in my situation, so don't need quite to look for other world.
Mm.
I guess.
Right.
What years was that?
1970s, 1980s, those times.
1970.
Yeah, there were, 1970s. Yeah. That's end of Vietnam War, is that right? Yeah, it's 1975.
Correct.
Yeah, how was the
Yeah.
history
75.
at that time in Japan?
But history, economic
70s.
growth, 70s, 80s, yeah.
You're wondering what the history is, Jack, of
Yeah.
that time? It's a good question. Okay, so what are the historical circumstances in which people grow up? They shape our consciousness a lot, don't they?
Maybe the history form you thoughts, ideas.
Eh,
Did it affect?
If you are interested in that area, yes, I suppose so, but I wasn't
Oh, it
Really?
wasn't.
interested
Okay.
at that time. Yes, certainly we sang what anti-war folk song in the music class, but didn't
right.
pay much attention to lyrics, just a melody.
That's interesting. So the
Yeah.
majority were kind of against the war, would you say? And the teachers obviously would have decided to sing that. So
No, that's
Huh?
in the textbook.
Right.
Nobody cared the lyrics. I don't think
Ah.
so. We never ever
Uh-huh.
analyzed,
Nobody cared about the
cared
lyrics.
about.
Yeah. But somebody must have decided that's a very political song, isn't it? I mean, in some respects,
I don't know how much those things that they considered, because
Mm.
our music book
Mm.
included those folk song and Christian hymn.
Uh-huh.
Then
Okay.
I don't know
Right. So
how they chosen just a wide range of
Yeah.
bits of everything.
how they were chosen,
They were
passive.
chosen.
Yeah. Right.
Not
Okay. So it's possibly
intentionally.
hidden in the diversity was this radical political song. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. That's one kind of Jin's here. All right. And hopefully she hasn't been waiting too long. Yeah, that's true. That is one way of things being invisible, isn't it? If you just like removed physically or due to technology or the lack of it or whatever. And that's probably happened to lots of us, I think, or certainly probably the older generations more so. Like we grew up in more rural environments. There's been this urbanization. With that urbanization, more technological connection. So things are automatically more visible. I guess what I think she's getting at here is that there just wasn't any critical thinking in the sense that we're going to look at it. It just wasn't there. It didn't exist. And if something doesn't exist, it's hard, and you don't hear about it, it's hard to think about it, isn't it? It's the best way, in a sense, of preventing people from doing something if they just never learn of its existence. And her point there, I think, is, if you actively discourage, say, don't do that, don't ever eat the lollies in the jar to the little kid. Don't ever eat the lollies. Don't ever eat the lollies. But the little kid knows the lolly jar is there, right? But if the little kid never knows the lollies are even there, you've got perfect sort of parental control.
Yeah.
But often,
Thanks.
sometimes you don't realize how much you are actually held back in going forward by until you break out from there and you realize, oh my gosh, and this is really what happens to me when I arrived in Australia.
Right.
I-
What happened?
Yes, what
Yeah.
happened? It's like
Mhm.
I always felt I'm sort of fenced in type of thing. Felt like I'm not really allowed to move forward with my own life or my own ideas.
Yep.
Or how I felt until I broke out. I felt it was a completely different feeling, and I felt a lot more freer. And I sort of made a note
Mhm.
of how I experienced that. If you want,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
read it.
do, yeah.
Born into a democratic, conservative, militia organized Swiss society, the average Swiss family, including mine, were or are a pretty well organized and follow the given, assumed and colluded rules and regulations. I would even argue that to some degree, due to an invisible, unofficial, colluded caste system, every family has or had their place within the community, which means everyone is or was expected to take their place in the society or more or less stay there.
Mm.
I found it very difficult that even in our small village, we had the hierarchy where people who moved into town, even it was 2 or 3 generations ago, they were still foreigners. And
Yeah.
they still lived at the bottom part of having a say within the community. And those who sort of were born like 300 years ago, or the families into that type of village, they were the rulers. They more or less
Mhm.
were the elders of the community. So it was very difficult for people who at some stage moved into that community to move up and have a real influence on influence and say what is happening within the community, or to make any changes. So, and that's why when I came to Australia, I felt like, oh,
Right. A breath of fresh air,
Yeah,
as we
breath of
say,
fresh
that idiom. The place, it's a breath of fresh air,
yeah,
not physically, but
Yeah.
just emotionally,
yeah,
intellectually.
yeah.
Yeah.
John, sorry, John,
fresh air. Yes, please, Helena.
can I say some words? I'm
Go for it. Yeah.
yes, if you compare this critical thinking in democratic society, in conservative democratic society,
Mm.
and in communist society, no, communist like in Soviet Union, we
Yeah.
have I see just only one difference. We all the same, but only difference with punishment. Punishment in democratic society was from society, just from your neighbors, from society. You are becoming un-Australian, un-American, or un-British, doesn't matter. But in communist society, we had punishment from the system of control and suppression of dissent. We are going to jail. Just one way. If you want to be different, you are going to jail. You would punish me. This punishment, this is the difference with punishment, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think?
True. I think that probably is a correct distinction, isn't it? Yeah. Although, I mean, I guess there's other non-communist societies that any kind of dictatorship, I guess. Like, I guess if you were in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, or Somoza's Nicaragua, or Pinochet's Chile, and you expressed your ideas, probably a similar thing.
Yeah, you are going to jail. You are not allowed to
Yeah.
have different thinking, critical thinking. It is impossible. It was impossible at all.
Yeah, that's good point. So we've got different. That relates to the question last week about at what level was people's critical thinking kind of suppressed. Mary Heath's writing about it very much because she lives in a relatively democratic society, Australia. She was mainly writing about the family and family pressures, wasn't she, of why some of that-
Family, neighbors, society, yeah.
yeah, that's right. Cultural, and Heinz, you're talking about cultural.
Yeah.
And then there's another level of the state. You know, education systems can do it. And then if all of that fails, the policeman will knock on the door. And so you've got these you've got a ladder, if you like, of levels that they can all suppress critical thinking, or some do and some don't, or you could ideally have all of them encouraging it. I don't know if we've ever had that. Yeah, so I think that's kind of where your comment is going, I think, Galina, is that it's a good point that at that level, at that state level, there are some societies, and some people have come from those societies, where there's that active suppression and it becomes physical, like you get locked up or whatever, or worse. And Heinz, your description is interesting, I think, because it fits quite exactly into high context society, doesn't it? That, I think most people here have done stuff with me on, you know, low context societies, high context societies. It's Edward Hall, if you want to look it up, Edward Hall, 1976, Beyond Culture. It's his book on high context and low context society, and everything you described there, Heinz, the hierarchy, the difficulty of breaking in and getting accepted, very fixed ideas and behavior, usually long generations of it.
Yeah.
And that can be quite sort of suffocating. It's got positives because there's a strong sense of community and connection, isn't there? And but a lot of people, you know, find it stifling, that word. Yes, from last week. And many students over the years have commented when we've discussed it that they find low context societies a lot more relaxing on some levels, or liberating, it would be the better word.
It's interesting when I go back to Switzerland for holiday, it's within a couple of weeks I feel like I've never been away because things are still so much the same, ingrained into the whole system, so deeply ingrained.
That's a nice word. I'm just watching my spaghetti here. All my cords are going everywhere. I'm just going to share again, get a few words. And good collocation, deeply ingrained. Whoops, deeply, not deeply. Deeply ingrained in. What did you want to say, Heinz? We'll write it out as a. What's deeply ingrained in what?
Deeply ingrained into society.
Yeah. What is deeply ingrained?
The behavior.
Yeah.
The expectations.
Behavior. Oh my God. Yeah. So we'd say, you're talking about conservative. Yeah. So I'll just put it in a full sentence so that we get a good sense of it. The conservative behaviour is deeply ingrained in that society. Okay. So here, the adjective, isn't it? Ingrained. Grain here, not a grain of wheat. Right, grain is, think of a piece of wood, if there's a real piece of wood, like that shelf just there behind Jack. That cupboard has got behind, that's right, those lines in wood, that is called the grain. And I don't know why it's called the grain. I can't explain that one. Interesting, look it up. So if something's ingrained in, it's like it's embedded. Those lines are stuck in the wood, deeply stuck in there, aren't they? They are part of that wood. They are part of that substance of the wood. You're probably not seeing that, yeah. So something is deeply ingrained. What could we say? It's another word is embedded, but that may also, embedded is like layers. We use the same sort of metaphor.
We cannot see on the big screen.
I don't know why.
The wire
The
loop.
chords come out. There, it'll come back, I think. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, so it's deeply ingrained or embedded or deeply, even if we just said it's like, and you must say in. So it's deeply part of. We could, another verb we could say is inherent. Inherent to, I'm just getting the prepositions right. Something's part of that society, it's inherent to. Penetrate. Penetrate is like it's gone in. I guess if it penetrate is more an act of going from outside to in.
More
Here,
action is
yeah,
present.
that's right. Here it's already in there.
Oh.
Another couple of verbs, or sorry, adjectives. Inherent in, intrinsic. Intrinsic to, just getting all your collocated preposition. Sorry. Yeah. So those are probably useful. They're all important phrases expressing something is fundamentally part of. Sorry, just clearing up typos in the earlier section too. Yeah, so when you have conservative cultures like this, and Mary Heath grew up in one in Australia, you know, Australia's got them too, then certain things you just don't even think about. There's not even a debate about certain things, just never discussed. So you can't really even think it, you know. You don't have to say to somebody, stop thinking that, or don't you disagree with me, or, you know, there's just not, the debate isn't even there, doesn't exist. You don't come across those ideas when you live in a country town in Australia and you read the Advertiser. Even though the Advertiser, to be fair, would have you know, a little bit of debate in it, but you know what I mean. And the word is, when you grow up in a small country town, parochial, very local, whoops, sorry, local, narrow-minded. It's got that sense of very narrow-minded, a parochial village or whatever. Yeah. Even, you know, some people say, oh, Adelaide, very parochial. Some people don't think outside of Adelaide. They're not very aware of the world. As I've said before, try to find some international news in the Advertiser. Sort of page 17, half a page. The rest of the page is Harvey Norman, isn't it? You know, that is, seriously, that is, you usually get about half a page of international news, and probably half of those stories are about the Kardashians or some cat that's given birth to, you know, 45 kittens or some weird, you know, just silly thing.
The Daily Mail.
That's the Advertiser I'm thinking of. But the Daily Mail is like that too.
I see.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so parochial from the Latin. All right, so that question of just this idea of invisibility. Sorry, I'm having a really bad time today. Invisible. I'm having a really bad time with my typing. Invisibility. Now, I just want to link that while we're here, this idea of invisibility as a critical. Why am I raising it as a point to focus on in her text? because you can see how powerful it is. If there's just a silence, so the word I want to use is a silence, because I think she uses it too. If there's a silence about something, it's the most effective way of just not having a debate. And basically what you are presented with, you just assume that and you grow up with it, no debate and no criticality. So it's one of the most effective forms. And I just want to point out that further down, she does mention here in the dimensions of critical thinking, she opens up, she sort of starts looking at the toolbox, and we'll get onto this. And I don't know whether we'll get onto it this week, but because there's a lot to discuss before it, but I just do want to jump down here because it is directly related to this bit, I think. So when there's a silence, she's saying, oh, look, there are certain silences about whole areas of social behavior and thought and everything. Anyone want to have a read of that one? How about Azuma? JLE, would you mind reading that one? It's page 6 of the document, or on her page numbers are page 16. I'll use the term her pagination. Pagination is the noun. It's the system of page numbering. Pagination. You might have seen it in Microsoft Word, or you certainly see it in academic writing. Pagination. So her pagination, the PDF pagination is 16. But if we're following the numbers down the side like that, it's just number 6. Examining silences. Jelly, could you have a read of that, please?
Yeah, and then before I read, I would also like to just say something. I found it very interesting because when I'm looking at you talking, and then I still remember 2016, I moved to Australia. I arrived in Adelaide and I stayed there a year. Looking back, that year that I moved to Australia, I still remember I joined the communist club to learn all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking back, I was so patriotic, very, just looking at my political point when we're talking about critical thinking, I was very, how to say, patriotic, nationalistic, and then always defensive, protective if someone is saying something very bad about China.
Yeah.
And then growing up in that kind of culture, I think I never critique. Always assumed what I have been taught is in that way. My dad, he used to be a soldier, he's very patriotic as well.
Yeah.
And then I have mentioned to you that I became a member of the Communist Party.
Yeah, you have actually. Yeah.
Yes, it's very interesting looking back over the years, and then because I have been living in Australia, I haven't been out for even more than a month or something. So it's like living in this we call it low context society, and then now when I go back to read some Chinese blogs, some articles, I feel a bit suffocated. It's very good, like when you see like the Olympic Games and Chinese are all very proud of how many metal or how many gold, all of this.
Medals.
Medals, yeah. They have got, I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I changed. I think I have changed. I just found it very interesting, and looking, and then I feel proud. I still feel proud. When I watch the video, I would be in tears, feel proud of my country, where I'm from, my home country. But then sometimes I look at them, I feel there's no critical thinking at all. We've never been taught to critique, to question, to think in any other way. And sometimes I just think it's very dangerous if people were all taught, educated in that way, without critique or think. How to say, if use a metaphor, is like you being raised up very strong, very healthy, but has no brain. And that can be very dangerous. Can
Yeah.
be, I don't know how to explain. I just feel like it's too intense sometimes.
Mm.
And I can't imagine myself go back to, it's very bad. And sometimes I've been blaming myself. Like, I've betrayed my country, you know, why I've become
Yeah,
like
right.
this, you know, why I've so it's it's but
No, it's interesting that you say that,
it's
Shirley.
very,
Like, I hadn't
yeah.
thought of that self-blame thing, but Jack, yes.
I blame myself. And then a few months ago, I making the decision to change my citizenship, and I postponed my interview once and twice because I couldn't decide whether I can change my citizenship, because I consider it as a sign of betraying my home country.
Right. Yes.
I still, you know, so I feel like,
Mm.
I don't know, maybe it's just the way that we were taught, and it's so hard. Even you've been living overseas for so many years, but it's just very hard for you to get out of it and to think independently, not carrying the guilt, not having the blame on yourself. Now you're living here independently. You can talk, you can have your voice, you know, you can critique, you can have things done in a different way. But when I was in China, never questioned why after my night shift I still have to go for a meeting. I cannot go to sleep home. I still have to do this, you know. And they just told me you have to do it. It's so it's just very interesting.
It is, yeah. No, I mean, you know, in lots of ways, China is quite closed, certainly at that state level. And then, yeah, so if you come out of that and you sort of almost deprogrammed, aren't you? You're deprogramming yourself. You've been programmed for many years. I mean, we all have in every society. I'm not saying you're not programmed in Australia, because you are. All of us are. But some are programmed more intensely. China's pretty intense. So if you come out of that and, you know, you engage in a process of deprogramming, and not all Chinese people necessarily would, but obviously you have, Julie, then, yeah, it's an emotional journey, isn't it? It's not just an intellectual one.
Yeah.
It's an emotional one. And I think that's what comes across in Mary Heath's writing, is that it, you know, the intellectual changes come with emotional costs and benefits. Yeah. It's not just, and social ones. You lose some people and connections, or they weaken, or they get more distant because you're kind of alienated now because of, you know, you don't share the same ideas you did, but you gain others, you know. It's, yeah, so critical thinking is not just an intellectual thing. It's a social and emotional phenomenon. It becomes that. And that's why I like this piece, because a lot of critical thinking approaches are, okay, let's practice these intellectual exercises and so on. And sure, that's useful to learn the toolbox, but she's got this nice overview and a kind of deep view involving the whole person. And that's the sort of thing you're talking about, I think, yeah.
Well, I often think...
Thanks, Shirley.
I often think when you go out into a forest, for example, or into the wilderness, and you follow a path, it's like you follow that path that's given to you. But if you go off the path, you suddenly see things you would never see if you stay on that path. I think often that kind of experience, that emotional experience, is going off the beaten path to experience new things.
Off the beaten path in a forest. You must be a mountain bike rider. Heinz is a big mountain bike rider, I know. Absolutely. And there are actual poems on that sort of thing. In English, there's a famous one, The Path Not Taken. Yeah. And it's about that idea. And the two paths in the wood, and which path I went down, and therefore, because I went down that one, I don't know. I didn't have that experience of what was down that other one, the path not taken. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
all right.
Thank you for listening.
Have a read.
I'll go.
Thank you.
Yeah. With the
so that was very interesting.
examining silences.
Yeah. Please, by the way, that's what we're here
So-
for. And Zoom, I'd encourage Zoomers in particular. Thanks, Julie, for doing that. Like, throw in your, if this stuff's resonating and you've got something you'd like to say, please say it. Yeah, that's what we're here for. Doesn't really matter how long we take to get through this stuff. There's no definite goal here. It's like the process of discussion and opening stuff up. That's the key, right? So please, anyone, anytime.
All right. So we can also ask who is speaking about this claim or proposal and what are they saying? If more than one voice is present, what do you notice about the differences in what each voice contributes? Who is silent? Why are they silent? Who is silenced? Not allowed to speak, not reported as speaking, not listened to if they do speak. It is helpful to consider our own silences. Are they chosen by ourselves or encouraged by others? Does speaking involve penalties? Are there places where we speak? In what ways do our decisions to speak prevent others from speaking? How could we enable their speech? Is it possible that the way we speak creates silences?
Yeah, thank you. There actually, there are quite a few questions, and every one of those actually opens up a whole debate. But I just want to point to this idea that, there are silences, and often they are because more powerful people have dominated the space, and that could be media space, could be space in a room, could be publishing space, physical space. Men treat physical space differently from women. Generally, that's pretty well accepted. Even in feminist literature, just psychologically, people walk into a room. There are those unconscious differences. So, and that can silence. It can make some people feel more confident and some people feel less confident. So these silences are critical. A good critical thinking question to ask yourself is, what is missing? What is missing when you're looking at a text and reading it? What is not there? Which voice, if you like, is not there? That's quite hard to think about. It's like the little kid who doesn't know where the lolly jar is. Can they ask themselves that question? Where are the lollies? Well, I don't even know that there are some to be found. Right? So, if certain things are just so suppressed that you don't even know they exist, that's important. Like, am I in that situation possibly? Is there a voice I'm not hearing? And then where would I find that voice? One of the most obvious examples, just to mention in relation to Australia, would be, it's less the case now, and certainly if you turn on the ABC, you'll hear it a lot, Aboriginal voices. But, in the past, a lot of that was quite silent. They just never got a voice and spoke and told their own history in the way they wanted to tell it. We never heard their side of the story about life before invasion, process of invasion, process of dispossession, etc., etc., etc. Or what just interpretations of their culture. That was silent for a long time. Marginalised and oppressed groups are generally, there's more silence.
Why has it changed?
Where or why?
When has it changed and why?
That's
what
good.
Triggered?
I'd say again, it goes back to the 60s and 70s and the leftward movement, in the trade union movement. Here, the Communist Party was quite active in getting the 1967 referendum passed, which got them full acceptance and citizenship formally and got them equal wages, And then from there was an Aboriginal movement in the 70s, a big Aboriginal movement, mainly against mining and for land rights. And then 1988 was the centenary of the bicentenary, 200 years since whitefellas arrived in Sydney, 1788. So that 200th anniversary, you know, white Australia was sort of, or the Conservatives saying, let's celebrate. Yeah. Aboriginal people were saying, absolutely not. This was the beginning of the end for us. So there was 5 years of movement up to that point, like the Don't Celebrate movement. So they started to, through those various social movements of land rights, the bicentennial, protesting the bicentennial, their leadership became, some important, you know, smart leaders emerged who were very articulate, and those voices started to get into the media, mainly the public media, mainly ABC, SBS. And they've sort of stayed there, those voices, and other people have come up and replaced them, and, you know, or added to them, you know. So over the last 30 years, so that laid the groundwork. I think the 20 years of late 60s and 70s and the 80s, and then once that was established, you know, we started to get Aboriginal playwrights, film writers, actors, artists. Aboriginal art became famous. That started in the late 70s. The Aboriginal art, the dot paintings, we didn't see that before then. So these are the ways Aboriginal culture and thinking has, again, you know, it was silent and the space was dominated by white Anglo Australia. And those voices have kind of started to come in from the edge, you know. But we can think of it as a kind of like a silence, which has been broken to a reasonable degree, but not everywhere. So, you know, other historically marginalised or oppressed groups also have had silence imposed on them. Can you think of other groups, either in Australia or in your native country or globally, that perhaps are involuntarily, you know, generally it's involuntary, more silenced historically than others?
I think my experience here in Australia, when I had a small business, and this business was involved with sewing machines, so I had a lot of contact with ladies who came in the shop buy sewing machines or repairs and whatever. And I was amazed of how many...
Amazed at?
I was amazed at the fact that women came into the shop looking to buy a new product and then couldn't make the decision to actually buy it. They had to go home and ask the husband whether they could buy it or not. And then worse is, more often than not, they came back together and the husband made the decision which one she should have. But he had
How much did he know about sewing?
No idea about sewing, no idea. And I felt incredibly sorry for these ladies because they were, without any doubt, suppressed by their husbands of making decisions. So this to me was an obvious group. And I think, you know, to be fair, over the last probably 40 years, that has changed quite dramatically, that women are much more vociferous.
Vociferous, great word, yeah.
Vociferous.
If you think of voc, to speak, vocal, vociferous, fur, to carry, vociferous, carrying a voice. So it means capable of speaking out, vociferous, yeah.
So, yeah.
I'll write it up in a minute. Just
that was
remind me.
One of the experiences I made.
Yeah.
Within the white.
Right, that's an interesting observation, yeah.
So in your own country, it didn't happen?
Oh, yes, yes.
Right.
But back then,
Yeah.
because I grew up within that format or within that structure of the society back home or the families back home, to me that was normal.
Okay.
And I didn't realize it until, you know, I was sort of on the other end, basically. Yeah.
Seeing it from outside,
From,
kind
yeah,
of
from
thing.
the outside
Yeah.
sort of thing, yeah.
Invisible.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. That's true, isn't it? Like things that we just accept, we don't see them. They're under our, we say in English, they are under our nose. So it's right there under our nose, and we don't see it. And sometimes the closest things to us, the most everyday thing, it's invisible to us.
And the bad part about it is I realized how much work I had to do at home, on my own home, with my wife.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, you know, like it was just.
Are you going back to control your wife?
Well, she was Swiss as well, and so she basically didn't have all that much of different expectations until we both sort of realized there are things we should both work on.
That's another interesting point, isn't it? Often it can happen that oppressed people internalize their oppression, and therefore they lower their expectation of what I'm capable of, or what I should be able to achieve, or and that's part of the oppression, is that their sights, as we say, the sights, like aiming a rifle, their sights are set so much lower than other groups who have higher expectations.
Definitely.
My partner came from the countryside, and just an example is, you know, there's class oppression too, isn't it? That was gender oppression you're talking about.
Yes.
Her father he's still alive, but he's retired now, but he was a road worker, council road worker, so manual worker in the countryside, very working class guy. And he said, you know, people like us don't go to university. And that was set, like, and there was a big battle about, you know, coming to the city to go to university. And it said over and over again, people like us don't go to university. So very low expectations set, because, you know, you're a worker, like you're going to be a worker like me. You're going to probably work in the shop in the country town, and
it was like that.
And that's not the obvious, you know, some upper class person deliberately saying to someone, oh, you know, you can't do that. It's like the working class person saying it to themselves or saying it to their own family. And that stuff is almost more powerful.
I think so. At the same time, I found back then in my primary schools, we were one teacher with 64 kids for 6 classes, and pretty well coming into that school, into the class, you almost knew that either you go to university or not. And for some kids, this was a lot of extra pressure, like it was put on them to make sure that they are going to university. So that's sort of pros and cons as well.
True, that's right. It can, indeed, you know, your elite private schools here, where there are those high expectations on kids, those kids suffer a certain stress because of that expectation. It's true. I mean, I can even think of silence. What about even silence in terms of, just you were talking about education there, Heinz, you know, class and language, like, you know, we talk about English and standard English and certain forms, like I've said before, use, hey, use guys, you know, it's seen as very low educated, like bogan, you know. So that is sort of suppressed, and that voice, that working class voice, if people, working class kids start writing that, using that sort of language to the teacher, native speaker, they'll get their piece of work back and it will be filled with red pen. But is it, you know, really, is it an error? It's actually English. It's just English of a certain class. And that voice and that way of speaking is suppressed and filtered out. And there's a middle class hegemony. Hegemony means like dominance. It's an important word. I've got a couple of words here. Hegemony, we need to talk about hegemony a lot because there's a collocation, ideological hegemony. We've got cultural hegemony, military hegemony. Hegemony means you're dominant. You're the hegemon, which means like the person or the thing in total control. So like the United States is the hegemon of the world, right? It's a Greek word meaning dominating. Yeah. So hegemony is the abstract noun, the process of dominating. But we have, if we're going to explore, as we are, critically, you know, power in society and the ideas attached to that power and the culture attached to it, that's what, you know, Mary is talking about. We need some of the language. And, you know, an important word you come across in political and social and cultural studies is, and international studies, is hegemony. Cultural hegemony and perhaps most importantly, ideological hegemony. So the system of political ideas. So we have, yeah, you can have this kind of hegemony or, you know, class cultural hegemony in this case, or linguistic hegemony. Right? You've got the middle class voice that's kind of, it's just all unconscious, but it's saying to the working class person, your voice, the way you speak and write is not important. I'm going to silence it. And it suppresses it and filters it out. And we're going to learn this way of writing. Now I can just, to the little my experience and knowledge of, say, China here, but I'm sure it might apply to other countries. Think of local dialects, the way your grandma speaks, say, you know, or people in the countryside. Now, you know, instead of the standard Putonghua, say, the national language, you know, they're not allowed to say, kids who talk that even in the playground at school, you're not allowed, I think, are you? You're certainly not allowed to answer questions in class using dialect. So farmers' voices, you know, country class, working class voice, in a sense, that's getting suppressed. The national language is suppressing it, creating a silence. Now, maybe that's a good thing because we all want that national unity. But the point is, this is what critical thinking is about. Well, let's not just assume it and accept it. Let's have the debate. Should we just have this one language, or should we allow various dialects into schools? That can include regional dialects, class dialects, you know, that you're going to get that diversity. It's a bit like multiculturalism. To me, there's a richness in doing that you lose if you create national languages. You actually lose those dialects with often thousands of years of creativity in them and artistry and kind of collective knowledge, actually. It's like language extinction. It's a problem. Anyway, just exploring this idea of silence, right, and suppression through hegemony. I'll just write these words and untangle here. Hegemony of the proletariat. Yes, Galina, correct. Hegemony of the proletariat was the main aim of the Communist Party in the USSR. That's indeed exactly right. It is not entirely, but it's often a Marxist term because they're looking at power and class, aren't they? And some communist projects are about reversing that hegemony of the capitalists and the feudal classes, the aristocracy, and flipping it over and reversing it and having hegemony of the working class, which is the reverse of what happened before. Can you tell us, Galina, a bit about how that was in the Soviet Union, how it was expressed? Or
hegemony of the proletariat it was the main idea of the Communist Party from the beginning. It was Marx's idea, then Marx and Engels' idea, and then Lenin kept it, and it was the idea of the international revolution around the world, this proletarian revolution. But what was the result? What was the result? At the end of the day, we had Stalin. And what he did, he killed all this main idea, and he was maybe worse than Hitler.
He was
worse than
what?
Hitler.
Worse
than Hitler.
Right. Yes, yes.
Because he killed people from his own country.
Right.
We can compare them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, even it's not probably good to say this. I don't know why it's not good, but it's my critical thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that he did a lot of bad things. He damaged all this idea of the he was one of the worst dictators in the world.
Yes, indeed.
How many people he killed? 10 millions, 15 millions, much more. Exactly in the camps, in these concentration camps in the USSR, not in Germany, in Siberia.
And the Ukrainian famine as well.
Oh, Ukrainian famine.
That was
even now.
Stalin,
even now, Russian Federation, they are not accept this.
Right.
Then they don't say that about this Holodomor, that it was genocide
of
the Ukrainian.
There's something more.
Holodomor.
Holodomor.
Yes.
Is it spelled like this? Is it like
that?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the more.
Yes, because this. Yes, because Holod is famine. Holod is famine. Yes.
Yeah, and the more is death, isn't it?
So more death. So killing people by famine is Holodomor.
Right.
In Ukrainian language, is exactly in Ukrainian language.
You do see in history, in historical texts in English, they do use this word. So we have imported this. It's a Ukrainian word, not a Russian word.
Yes, it's Ukrainian word. I don't know, maybe it's Russian as well.
Yeah.
But this Holodomor. In Russian, you have to change first letter from H to G, like Golodomor. Yes.
Yeah, right.
And Ukrainian is Holodomor. Yes. And you pronounce like it's softer.
Yeah. Now this famine wiped out huge numbers of people, millions. Wasn't it? And it was a lot of
about 7 million, about 7 million, and exactly in rural areas, in countries, places, in villages, because exactly in these places they spoke Ukrainian language.
Right.
And now we have a war with Russia, exactly on this point, but it's not true that Russian language is under law. You are not allowed to speak Russian. That is bullshit. Excuse me for this word. It's not right. I speak Russian. A lot of my friends speak Russian. And we are not punished for this. No, we are free.
So I think
it's very complicated to tell about this.
Yeah,
it's a long story.
If you're going to say tell, to tell you, or to talk about.
To tell you, to talk about. To tell you about.
This might be a useful collocation. irreparable damage. You're saying great, you can say great damage, but this, I think this is what you're
Mhm.
expressing really.
Yes, I would like to
So,
say this. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
now we don't say irreparable, it's from the word repair. So the opposite is not unrepairable.
It's irreparable. Yes.
irreparable. And that's how we say the stress on the irreparable damage. And it's a collocation. So it's damage you cannot repair. So
Yeah. You
Stalin,
cannot repair this damage. Absolutely no.
right, he did do that damage due to the killings and the dictatorship. And
He killed the main idea. He
Yeah.
killed everything.
Yeah.
He killed trust. He killed everything.
True. And there, you know, I guess out in the rest of the world, in some places, there's been some recovery of socialism, anti-Stalinist socialism from that. But it's been very difficult because the Stalinists dominated communist parties around the world for a long time, you know, as you
And you know what? Very, very sad is that a lot of people in Russian Federation, I can say it's about 61%, still put Stalin on the first position among the political main figures in the country.
Yeah, really.
They still remember him and still put monuments for him. Still now, after all these evidences.
So even though Lenin's been pulled down, you still see some Stalinists.
But Stalin is the best for them.
Really?
Yes, still now. Yes, this brainwash, they are just, they are clean at all. They don't have critical thinking at all.
That's pretty nice.
Especially in Russian Federation. In Ukraine, about 20% of people still thinking like this.
Okay.
It's a lot as well. It's a lot.
Yeah. I actually know, strangely, I know probably a couple of Stalinists here.
Really? Do you? How old are they?
They're a bit older than me.
It's okay.
And interestingly, what's that?
How come in here, in Australia?
Because
they are everywhere. It's worse than COVID-19. This worse than COVID-19. It's epidemic.
It is a good question. I mean, overall, okay, here's an expression. They are on the wane. On the wane means decreasing, thank you. The opposite, by the way, we have wax and wane. Think of the moon. The moon waxes, it grows. It wanes, it shrinks. Now, you've got to be careful with this one because we can say Stalinists. I may as well put Stalinists in there. Stalinists are on the wane. They've been decreasing for a long time, 50 years, at least in the West. But we cannot say Stalinists, if they were growing, we cannot say Stalinists are on the wax. That means they're slipping on the floor, the waxy floor. No, it doesn't exist, but we can say anything is on the wane. Think of a fashion, like sideboards, you know, men's hair here. Oh, it's going out, it's disappearing, it's on the wane. Long skirts are on the wane. Short skirts are coming in, something's, you know, so we can talk political fashion too. So Stalinists are on the wane, but, you know, once they were quite dominant on the left, and the reason in answer to Jin's question is because, you know, Stalin controlled the Comintern, which is like the Communist International, the Comintern. So in other words, all the communist parties around the world were kind of loyal to what Moscow said. And that was since its establishment in 1920s, and maybe the early days, there was, I think, a bit more democracy to it, but then Stalin, by the mid-20s, had got control of it and kept that control. Comintern was abolished during World War II, actually, as a deal, I think, with the West. But so for 20 years. And then, look, it was officially abolished, but even after that, basically the Communist Party of Australia listened to Moscow, and whatever Moscow said was the line of the way things should be interpreted, the way the international situation was, what people in Australia should do. They accepted that uncritically. So again, back to this critical thinking thing, you know, it wasn't like a bottom up. It was meant to be, but it wasn't. So all the kind of orders came out from Moscow, and Stalin was in control of that, right? So he Stalinized the communist parties everywhere. And so people who joined the Communist Party back in the 30s, 40s, into the 50s, 60s, then what happened in Australia, it split. After the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968, within the Communist Party, there was quite a debate, because there'd been a Soviet invasion of Hungary in 1956, because the Hungarians were trying to resist. And then Czechoslovakia, the Prague Spring, there was another resistance movement. And both times it was crushed, right, by Soviet troops. So for some people in that party, it was too much. And they said, nah, you know, bugger Stalin, I'm leaving that behind. I've got another idea of socialism, much more democratic. And they formed the Communist Party of Australia, and the old Stalinists became the SPA, the Socialist Party of Australia. We had that split, and that happened in many places around the world. So there was not no debate, you know, it actually bubbled up to the surface and created a split. This is kind of important because the left does actually, in most countries, shape debates quite a lot, even though it's very small. It has its influence in civil society, you know, and to discuss Australia and Australian culture, it's pretty important. For example, I mentioned in 1967, a year before that split, the Communist Party had been incredibly active in encouraging Australians to vote in the referendum, which said, do you accept Aboriginal people as like full citizens of Australia? And we include them, you know, constitutionally as full citizens. And Australians voted yes for that. And most of the time we voted no to most of that constitutional change. And without the Communist Party doing that sort of work, we probably wouldn't have got that result. And it remained, you know, my point is that the far left are very active in the social movements. You know, a lot of the demonstrations you see on the streets, those social movements, the climate change groups, etc., the Me Too movement, Extinction Rebellion, you know, the stuff you see on the news, a lot of far left groups are involved in that and shape it, you know, and they compete between themselves and fight and so on and influence, you know. So a study and an understanding of the far left and its history is important if you want to understand the history of social movements anywhere. And Australia is no exception, you know. So the point about, you know, Stalin, even though the Communist Party here was Stalinist, and that was a big problem, it was still doing some good things, like, say, that support for Aboriginal people. Like right back into the 1930s, non-Aboriginal communists were very supportive of Aboriginal land rights and all that sort of thing, way, way, way before anyone had even invented the term, you know. So, yeah, so, you know, he did this irreparable damage, and what happened is the party split, so you got a non-Stalinist group. Now, just at the same time, in the 60s, we get these, you know, anti-Vietnam War movement. Keiko, you mentioned it, you know, it's in Japan, it was pretty around the world, lots of places. And in the West, and it's not just Australia, in the US, UK, France, Western Germany, student movement was very big in opposing the Vietnam War. When people get active politically like that, especially young people, they start to ask bigger questions, and they start talking about all these alternatives, and socialism becomes one of those. And out of that movement, you got a whole lot of new socialist groups emerging. And they looked at the Stalinists, this period before them, the sort of socialism of their parents. And they didn't like what they saw. They saw Stalinism and all the problems with that. So they looked around and they went to three main areas, I suppose. Kind of a liberal democratic socialism, Maoism. A lot of young people looked at, in the late 60s, in Maoism, and they thought the Cultural Revolution was a pretty good thing, which might sound pretty strange to some Chinese people. But they only saw certain filtered elements. We can talk about this some other time. And the Trotskyists, right? And that Trotsky had been fighting Stalin in the Soviet Union and ultimately got defeated, But some people looked at Trotsky and the Trotskyists that had formed around him until he got killed in 1940 and said, actually, that's where you see democratic socialism kind of preserved, at least in its spirit, whether in its practice, that could be debated. But those, I guess, so that's what you had by the late 60s, early 70s. You had these various strands of socialism. You had Stalinism and various non-Stalinist forms. And just, it's a long answer to the question, but, where do these Stalinists come from? Strangely, Maoism. Maoism was, Mao was in the 20s and 30s when the Communist Party of China formed. It was very strongly shaped by the Soviet Union, but then Mao broke away from it in terms of strategy when the Comintern was basically saying, focus on the urban proletariat. That's where you're going to get your success. Mao, it gets complicated, but in 1927 there was a big failure. There was a massacre of the workers in Shanghai, and the Comintern had been saying that the Communist Party should work with the nationalists, and then the nationalists turned around and crushed them, right? So after that, there was not much trust in the Comintern, and Mao developed this strategy of, for other reasons as well, as let's go to the peasants, let's go to the rural workers. So it was a break from the Comintern on that level, on the level of military strategy, it was a break. But in terms of the political form of the party and the culture of the party, political culture, the level of democracy, the lack of it, it was pretty much a copy and paste. So a lot of that is why the Communist Party of China was and still is very top-down, very undemocratic. A lot of it goes back to its roots in Stalinism. And Mao was a great supporter of Stalin, great supporter. And therefore, those students who got attracted to Maoism in the 60s and 70s, and the centre for Maoism in all of Australia was Flinders University in Adelaide, strangely, because there was a guy there, Brian Medlin, who's a professor of philosophy. He was the main organiser of the anti-war demonstrations against Vietnam as well. And he had a big influence, and a lot of the whole, not just him, it wasn't one person, he was one, but a lot of academics at Flinders. It was one of the most left-wing places in Australia, and Maoism got really strong there. And a number of people a bit older than me were strongly influenced by that and have remained kind of Maoists today. And hence they are still Stalinists, And Galina, I have had arguments with these people, or discussions, I should say, about the Ukrainian famine, believe it or not.
I believe.
And there are people, like, they quote historians to me who basically say
It's not true.
Yeah, the famine hardly happened, and it's not true. And you know, the little bit that there wasn't Stalin's fault, etc., etc. There's a guy, Grover Furr, if you want to look him up, funny name, Grover Furr. And he is very much a Stalinist historian. Galina, you might be interested in just reading it, and you will be gobsmacked.
Can you please spell?
I'll write it down. These people follow him very sort of, I would say, kind of slavishly. Sorry, Grover. Grover Furr, double R. Pretty sure that's his name.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much pure Stalinist interpretation of history. Kind of interesting to read. I mean, I spent a week kind of throwing myself into it a few years ago, reading it to just get an understanding of how they think. I mean, I think, again, this is part of critical thinking. Throw yourself into people you don't agree with, you know, and really explore it and get to know it. Yeah. And, you know, who knows what will happen? You might swap sides. Yeah. So my point is, you know, even in a place like Australia, strangely enough, due to these sort of histories and these influences, there are Stalinists, there are Maoists, there are Trotskyists, you know, there are liberal socialists. There's always diverse people. But Maoism, you know, I guess after his death, it declined around the world, became less and less popular. They have not recruited new people, so they are all mainly that age.
That's good.
And the younger groups, I think, would generally Trotskyism tends to attract the young. And those groups, just on a demographic level, I'm not saying, you know, they're better or worse, but it's generally those, particularly university students. And this would be true not just in Australia. If we went probably certainly to England, it's true. I would imagine France, Germany, etc. Hilly, I don't know if you have any knowledge of university politics and so on, but I imagine far left on university probably would have its, whether they call themselves these days Trotskyist or not, some groups don't call themselves that because they don't identify that strongly with it, but they've come out of that tradition. Yeah. Does that resonate, Hilly, with any, you know, I mean, Germany, I imagine, has been through a number of those similar, that student movement, those divisions, etc.
Yeah, I know that there have been student movements, but I'm actually not so sure about, whether they have been Trotskyists or, Yeah. I should ask my parents, probably they were at uni at the time.
Right, yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, it was, a lot of it was, the critical period was very late 60s, early 70s, when that was the point of student radicalism. And then, as I was explaining last week, the neoliberal term, you know, capitalism generally started to crack down on universities, not physically, police and so on, most of the time not like in the West, but, you know, slow cultural filtration, selection. And now we have, you know, universities are very much training to get a job. The stuff I was talking about, STEM emphasis. But, you know, there still is the humanities, and you can still go and do political studies and study all that sort of thing, but you get less and less people doing it. And some departments have just shut down completely. Yeah, so again, I guess we could talk about, you know, even funding can silence, we'll get back to the science thing, funding can silence an area, can't it? Even if it doesn't, it's not necessarily even, we don't need total silence. Even if the voice kind of shrinks, often, and another voice floods over, that's enough to get the majority of people thinking what you want them to, you know, that's often sufficient. You don't have to stamp it out completely, and you know.
Just enough.
Yeah.
But the main question is, whom are you trusting? If you have documents For example, now in Ukraine, thanks God, our KGB in the past, now we call them Служба безпеки.
Galina, can I just interrupt, Galina? That's better. I love your hairstyle. It's fantastic, but we want to see a little bit more.
Sorry, just when I am talking. Now, our KGB, but not KGB like the secret service, they declassify, so open to the public, a lot of documents from this period of time, from 30s, from the last century, about exactly this Holodomor. And I don't understand how come you can discuss it was not or it was not if you can real documents. So the question is closed. You cannot discuss this. It was not, it was it or what it was not. It was because on the documents, that's it. And unlike in Russian Federation, all these papers are still in the safe places. They are under the key. You cannot read them. But we can read all these papers. These papers are official papers. They were written by these KGB officers in 1930s, last century. So
Galina, these documents show like how many people died in different villages.
Yes, and why, and the reason, and how they did this, all steps.
Right.
So the question is closed. You cannot discuss, was it or it was not. It was, unfortunately. And the reason why they did this. And how they did this. So I don't understand to this guy. What is his name?
Yes, it would be interesting.
Grover Furr,
for you to see what he says about. See, my memory of it is not sufficient to say that, or I haven't read him that recently. When have these documents been released, Galina?
During the last 10 years, they open slowly, pieces by pieces, and now they all open.
Okay.
And we have even a museum of Holodomor with all these papers, with all these evidences. That's it. The question is closed.
Right. Well, it would be interesting to see what someone like Grover Furr would say about that, because I think the stuff I read, you know, there's obviously a bit of delay. I mean, I know it's the internet, but I was reading books which would probably have been written more than 10 years ago before that evidence was released. So no doubt he has replied to it. And my guess he's got some kind of, suppose it for him, an answer. But what that would be, I don't know. He might say, oh, it's all falsified or something. You know, that's
yes, absolutely, absolutely. As they want to trust what they know, what they trust. That's it. You cannot.
That's right. Once we step into this territory, it gets tricky, doesn't it? Like, and as historians, critical historians, we have to start deciding, yes, what makes a document probably authentic and what doesn't. We have to ask that next question.
Yes, agree.
And that just to bring it back, because what I would like, I'm not bringing it out of the Ukraine permanently. I'm not saying that. I just want to point to Australia wherever I can, so that you guys are getting some understanding of, you know, cultural development, if you like, in Australia. Like, in relation to the Aboriginal question, of course, this has been a big issue. Just this question of authenticity of documentation, because there was a period in the early 2000s, and you can search it, called the History Wars. And on one side, we had Henry Reynolds, mainly, who is the famous, I guess, reinventor of Aboriginal history, who wrote books about the frontier and listened. He was, I guess, going back to your question, Keiko, about those voices, and he played a big part in getting the Aboriginal voice kind of into the mainstream, because he went out as a historian and interviewed a whole lot of people and gathered documents that had been silenced, right? And brought them into public light with the publication of about half a dozen books on the frontier. He was on one side, and a guy called Keith Windschuttle was on the other, more conservative side. And they had a big debate. See you, Jack. Happy dancing. Ciao, mate. There was a big debate about very similar question, Galina, as like how many people had died. Now, someone like Grover Furr, no doubt, says hardly anyone died in the Ukraine, and these documents, you know, say otherwise. So there's this debate, right? Now, same in Australia. Windschuttle says hardly anyone actually was physically killed or massacred. And Henry Reynolds says, no, there's all this evidence to show that there was. So, and then what kind of evidence was it? And one big issue was this, that Aboriginal people say there was a massacre of, say, 30 people and there were like 3 survivors, you know, because often that's about the size of the group. And then those 3, you know, they might attach to another group or even, you know, survivors of a larger group, whatever. But they have that memory. They don't write it down or report it to the police. The police were the ones often who did it, right? So there's no, also they don't read and write. They're, you know, at that stage, a lot of them would not have been reading or writing English, and they didn't have a written language of their own. So there's no written document. However, Aboriginal people are very good at memorization of stories and things like that. So that there are people today who have passed down knowledge and stories of Captain Cook arriving at Botany Bay and exactly what happened there between 2 or 3 Aboriginal people and Captain Cook's crew who came in the first small boat onto the beach, right? And that interaction has been passed down. Now, you could always say, is it accurate or not? But there's reasonable evidence. When they look at Cook's diary and they look at these Aboriginal people's reports, they match pretty closely, right? And there are several examples of that, not just one, right? Of other explorers and so on. So it seems there's a fair accuracy, but it's oral. It's only oral testimony. Now, in so-called Western history, we don't trust oral sources. Here's the, you know, I guess a critical thinking issue, you know, exactly as you said, Galina, what do we trust? What sources? And does it come down to the medium? Like, is it written? Is it oral? Some cultures only have an oral culture. But does that mean that we treat that as inferior in its accuracy? That became part of what they called the history wars, the debate. I don't know. What do you think? Let's have 5 minutes and we'll have a break, or 10. What do you think of this sort of debate? And is one more unreliable than the other, or equal, or what do you think?
Because I think if it's a written thing, it can be taught in school as an education. And if it's an oral thing, it just more or less becomes like a discussion, more an opinion, maybe sort of. Whereas if it's written, it seems to have a lot more authority or a lot more power behind the written words. That's how it was. And when somebody just comes up with a couple of stories that might have heard somewhere.
Are we imposing our cultural assumptions on another group if we think that the word has that greater veracity? Is the word veracity, meaning truth? What do you think? Or I guess just to unpick that, Heinz, if oral behavior in our culture is exactly that, isn't it? It's more discussion.
Yes.
But oral behavior in Aboriginal society, some sure is that discussion. Some of it, however, is just pure transmission. I'm going to tell you a story. I expect you to remember it and tell it to your kids as well, as precisely as I'm telling it to you now. Those are the expectations about certain oral behavior. Now, I've never had anybody speak to me like that in my culture, where they've said, I want you to remember what I'm saying right now, and I want you to remember it so exactly that, you know, I mean, I'll tell you several times as you grow up, but I want you to keep telling it. I mean, they don't even say it explicitly. It's just all expected. Now, we don't have that element, do we?
I find this a problem even with my grandchildren now. You're just expected to read from a book, a story, but I always try to just make up a story sort of thing. That's something maybe I remember or whatever, but it's not in a book. And in a way, I do hope that they remember some of those things. But you know, it's easier. Oh, I want you to read that book or that type of thing. And I think this is what the Aboriginals been saying, you know, for a long time now. This is our story. It's not written, but it's maybe some engraving somewhere on a cliff somewhere in a cave, because they didn't have the writing. It had to be an oral story.
Yes, and often combined, isn't it? That elders would sit with that cave drawing and tell a story in front of it, and the two things combined is the transmission. Yeah.
Even watching some programs on ABC and SBS from history in like the Middle East, like Egypt, about all these drawings and caves they are unpacking from the pyramids and from graves. It's mostly about pictures, and that sort of putting it all together. It does tell the story, but we are just not used to it anymore to tell stories like that. We're used to tell stories that's already written by somebody.
That's right. So there's the cultural assumption and expectation that the written form has this level of veracity, and I'll write that word down in a minute, like reliability, I guess we can say. But actually, hopefully we've now opened up the discussion to see that actually that's just an unconscious assumption, really, isn't it? And there's no reason why, if there's a culture of oral transmission that is extremely accurate and people's memorization skills are really good, there's no reason why that shouldn't be just as reliable as writing. And that's what Aboriginal people claim.
That memorization is accurate?
Because, good point.
Person to another person, maybe that person's interpretation comes in and slightly distorted.
Yes, you're right, Keiko. I guess we use this term triangulation of the data. You know, triangulation. So we use one method, but then we test it against another method. And if the two findings match, it's sort of like we've created a triangle, metaphorically. So triangulation of data. So my example of the Captain Cook diary. So does the Aboriginal story match the Captain Cook? So all we can do is take samples like that. We can't test it exactly, but we can take, there are many examples of that. And I think in class I've also mentioned examples of dreaming stories, for example, which describe land under the sea from 20,000 years ago, like certain valleys and rivers and so on that are now under the sea, but their location and shape is very carefully captured in stories, and it matches what recent radar imagery has shown of the bottom of the seafloor. Like there's areas near Darwin, and there are areas, the ones I know of, areas in Western Australia that those stories match. Now that's several thousand years of one person telling another, you know, hundreds of people, and it gets passed on, and that accuracy gets preserved. So that's kind of what I mean by it. We're triangulating it, and it suggests, doesn't prove, but it suggests that Aboriginal transmission, when they're serious about transmission of historical memory, that it can be very accurate. But all of this was thrown up for debate in the history debate, and there was this big discussion around it in the history wars, this period. And it's part of a bigger thing, the culture wars, which is, again, a left and right kind of thing that we can talk about later sometime. Well, what we'll do, we'll have a break. I'll just, because it's about an hour to go, we've gone a bit over time. I just want to go quickly through while we've got a bit of English, which has come out of this discussion. So, a few words before I mention vociferous. So, voc, voc to speak. Vociferous, someone who speaks a lot. So, someone who's not silenced, they've got the confidence to speak. Just by the way, when we're talking about decades, the 1930s, the 1950s, don't forget your the always. We talked about that before, just reminding. Evidence is uncountable. Common error, we can't have evidences. And remember last week, I think I said we can have monies and we can have damages. Okay, even if you're a lawyer and you specialize in gathering evidence, or a scientist, it never becomes evidences. All right, so that's a very firm one. The people I mentioned, and they are worth pursuing. Henry Reynolds, I'll put an L. He was more sort of on the left. And then there's Keith Windschuttle, I think you spelled his name like that. He was more on the right. You know, it's split on the left, right. I don't mean that kind of right. Yeah. And that was the history. If you look up the history wars of the early 2000s in Australia, it's a very interesting debate. And I've said before, if you go into these sorts of debates, especially around the Aboriginal issue, you dig up all sorts of stuff around, more generally about Australian culture, Australian attitudes, you know, it reveals all kinds of stuff. There's another word, veracity, just simply means truth. So ver is Latin for truth. Even when we say very, something is very, it actually means truly. Because we used to say this, have a look in Shakespeare. Oops, verily. Verily, meaning truly.
Еще не начался.
So now, you know, when we say I was very hot,
Я думаю, ты могла бы тоже
really
подключиться к таким урокам.
It's truly hot.
Хотя бы просто слушать.
Yeah. So ver means true, but veracity. So we're trying critical thinking. You know, we're trying to determine the veracity of the documents from Ukraine or Aboriginal testimony, oral testimony. What's the veracity? What's the truthfulness of it?
Can you say like oral history, oral stories appear to have a less or convincing veracity?
You'd say a high or low level of veracity. That's how you'd put it. So we could say strong veracity, low veracity. Yeah. Probably worth putting into just the word to see the collocations sometime if you want to use it, but those are the ones I can think of. All right, shall we have a break? It's 7, isn't it? So let's have a 10-minute break, and then we'll have a 15-minute chat. All right, we'll catch you.
Yeah, I checked. Oh no.
I better recharge. All right. We'll see you in about 8 minutes. Some of you have to go, do you? Heading off?
Yeah, me.
Okay. No worries. Hey, how are you? I'm good. Good. Yes, hang on. How's work? Right. Cool. Good. Got a bit of a slowdown, huh? Yeah. It's good. It's tax time. Oh, okay. Yeah, right. June 30th, and then all processing. Yeah. This guy's a very creative tax accountant, Heinz. Should be able to talk to
is
you.
he? Creative, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm very creative.
Not crazy, creative. Oh, yeah.
See you for a long time.
Yeah, because it was this tax season. I had to work overtime, so I didn't have time to come here.
Oh, right.
So but it's almost finished.
So you are not studying anymore?
No, not anymore.
What are your next plans? I think you were studying.
Yeah, I was a student.
Yeah, but you already finished college and got a job.
Yeah,
Good.
thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You studied accounting.
Yeah, I was doing
Finance. Yeah.
So you're permanent resident now?
Not yet. I'm going to apply for the permanent residency next year.
Okay.
And see.
Oh, you need 1 year.
Yeah, I need 1 year working experience.
What about you? Did you study at TAFE something or?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, in the past,
Mhm.
I'm sort of half retired now. I'm still
Oh,
doing a bit of work at
Good on you, yeah.
home, but
Yeah.
yeah, not much. How about you?
Do you work?
Yeah, I'm retired too.
Completely or semi? Semi-retired or
No.
completely
Me too.
retired?
Oh,
Yeah.
95%.
Okay. So what are you doing the rest of the 5%?
Bye, everybody.
Oh, see you.
Enjoy, have fun.
Yeah, take care. What I do is, if I can, I travel as much as possible. Hasn't been a bit hard lately.
Sure.
Tight now, isn't it?
But even within the state, I go often to the Flinders Ranges,
Okay.
biking.
You mean
hiking,
cycling there, Heinz?
Yeah, still a bit of
Cycling
cycling.
at Flinders Ranges?
Hmm?
You're cycling at Flinders Ranges?
Yeah, there's some beautiful trails up there.
Wow.
Yeah. Orienteering, all that sort of things. Yeah. And here at home, I've got a small farm. Not that I'm actually farming anything. It's more about maintaining everything. Yeah. And last year, because of COVID,
Yes.
of the restrictions of breaking out, I started to play golf.
Oh, right.
So just a matter of get me out of house and
Yes.
So we go up to the Blackwood Golf Club, is that your nearest?
Sterling.
Sterling, okay.
Yeah, go to
I
Sterling.
don't know
Oh,
Sterling,
right.
that's right.
Yeah, it's a pretty small little
Right,
nice course up
Yeah.
there, just in the bush.
right.
Yeah, it's because back in March, April last year, like when we had these restrictions
Yes,
everywhere,
yeah.
but you could play golf.
Oh.
We were allowed to play golf. So it was a good reason to go somewhere. daughter has taken over my business with her family. Took over the farm and a business, a sewing machine business. And
Sewing machine business should be good now because
yeah, it's
lots
good.
of women stay home and enjoy home sewing.
Yeah, it's good. It's been
Has that what happened?
yeah,
Slow.
yeah, definitely.
Higher sales.
Yeah, like sales and repairs have been very good. Yeah. But and they took children or grandchildren, so we spend a bit of time with them, and there's plenty of things to do.
Why did you decide to do sewing machine business? That's interesting.
I was working in Switzerland as a tool maker at the Bernina factory, one of the sewing machine factories.
Okay.
And they were looking for people to be trained on the sewing machines. So I did an extra year on the sewing machines. And then they were looking for people to go overseas into various countries to teach other people about the product there. So that's how I got out here. And that was my opportunity to break out.
Right.
Yeah, but honestly,
That sounds like a Soviet defector.
Yeah, it is a bit. You know, it's really, really hard to describe how the difference from landing here and everything felt like, whew, like freedom, and I don't know, and people are much more open-minded and didn't sort of care and gossip about the neighbors. Everything is very different. At work too, like that was the most amazing part. Like at work in Switzerland, it started at 6:45, and you got home about 5:30 in the evening, and it was like your normal routine. And here, I was started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and when I got there on the first day, everything was locked. I said, you know, I couldn't really speak English very well at all, and everything was locked, and I thought, what am I doing here? And I couldn't ring anybody because I didn't really know anybody, so I just waited. And about 9:15, people started to arrive. No, that's not true. About probably more 8:15, people started to arrive. And I opened the factory. In we ran straight into the lunch room.
Yes, yeah, and make
Have a cup of
coffee.
coffee, morning tea. And about 9:15, the workers disappeared from the lunchroom into the workshop because the office people arrived. So they went to the lunchroom until 9:30. It was a very different experience. And the first 3 months, it was like, oh, this is really great. But then I also got a bit bored with that kind of, like, it didn't really achieve a lot. Just doing a few hours of work sort of thing. And again, that was my opportunity to do my own thing from what I learned back home, to work a bit more efficiently and a little bit longer and a bit more, learning a bit more about things. And probably within 12 months, even though the language was still very poor, I got an external job, and within 2 years they sent me to South Australia to start to find new dealers within South Australia, like sort of a state manager job type of thing, and it was quite amazing, and opportunities were really there then, I have to say. I think to some degree there still are a lot of opportunities here in this country to do your own thing if you really push yourself a little bit. Yeah.
But then your shop, Heinz, dealt with, you could all make, in fact, didn't you? Because you ended up dealing with most brands of sewing machine, didn't you? Yeah.
Because again, like I was working for a Swiss company, and it's very, that's the only thing and the best thing, and nothing is better than that. And so everything was a certain restrictive way of how things are done, and I could see here, you know, different options of how to do things. And in my free time, I went to do courses on different machines, like on Genomis, on Husqvarna, on Elna, in my free time. So I learned a lot about other brands as well. And this shop here in Adelaide eventually became available as an all-make sewing centre, like all brands type of thing. And that was me. That's what I wanted to do.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
So, and it was a lot more there was a lot more satisfaction of being more diverse or diversified. Or
Diversity. Yeah, there's more diversity.
Diversity, yes.
The work was more versatile as well. You became more versatile at working with different things. And I started new things. I just felt it should be done. Like I started sewing classes.
Wow.
within a sewing machine shop, which wasn't really not done here. So we started to teach different techniques, and it worked like a gem. Like, it was amazing. And again, it was just another arm within the same business to make the whole job more interesting.
Oh, I see your message, Hans. Thank you. Thank you for the thought. That's right. Thank you. That's a nice thought. All right, shall we move on? We've got about 50 minutes or 45 or so for the last sprint to 8 o'clock. Let's move on to the next question. But I just want to, I guess, repeat or reinforce. Our Zoomers, are we all there? I think I saw Shana briefly. Hey, no one's there? Yes, they are. There's Hilly, Goodo, yep. All right. Okay, welcome back. I'll just recap quickly on point 4 because it's been the theme so far and we've come in and out of it. But just this point I guess there are 2 metaphors here. And they both involve the senses. One's of sight. So critical things being or certain things being invisible. You know, critical thinking being invisible, sort of suppressed to the point you can't see it. The other metaphor, as I said, it linked to what she talked about using another metaphor of hearing, silence, not hearing it, not seeing something, not hearing it. It's the same thing really, isn't it? It's just out of our consciousness, I guess, and we're using these 2 separate metaphors to express it. But this notion that things are silent, and often that can be the most powerful form of restriction of ideas, I guess, is how we might put it. And I'm just trying to get that other document up. You know, you've probably heard this expression, we don't know, or somebody doesn't know what we don't know, that point. Or anybody know who's famously said that? We have, and we've got all the combinations. You've got known, knowns, known, unknowns, and unknown unknowns. He said this. Donald Rumsfeld, know him? Wasn't he Secretary of Defence or Secretary of State? Secretary of Defence, I think, before and during the invasion of Iraq. And there was the claim that there were the weapons of mass destruction, remember, which turned out to be totally untrue. But he was talking about this whole thing of, you know, we don't know they're there, but we can, yeah, I can't remember the context he was using. It became famous, but it's kind of, it's actually an important critical thinking idea. You know, we have, if we don't know what we don't know, that's, I guess, the point. If you brought up in a narrow household, like, you know, I could say I was, some other people have suggested they were, Mary Heath indicates she was, and you don't know that you don't know it. And it's, you were saying it very clearly earlier, Heinz, that, you know, you didn't realise how limited your earlier environment was. It's because you didn't know that you didn't know something. And that's the role these silences can play. They just maximise ignorance to the point that we don't know what we don't know. So, you know, if we get to the point we known knowns, it should be known unknowns and unknown unknowns, yeah. So if we get to the point that we know we don't know, yeah, then there's a start, isn't it? Oh, I realise I'm ignorant. That's the beginning of the critical, hopefully, critical exploration of this new territory, and then we get expansion and growth. But that's the key thing, and not stuck at the not knowing that we don't know. So I guess there's been a theme, and it's something we'll return to, I think, the role of silence and how things get silenced. And we won't go into it any further because we've treated it a fair bit, but Mary Heath's good questions, actually, there's a lot going on in there, like the way I speak. Does the way I speak encourage somebody else to be silent? Is there something I'm doing in the way I'm speaking that is assisting that? I have to self-reflect about that. Yeah. So, and across cultural groups, across genders, across classes, you know, any possible marginalised sectors. Now, the other, and we looked at, you know, the suppression and the silencing of even evidence, I guess, around the Holodomor, around Aboriginal massacre, etc., and then the question of evidence, and even the perhaps silencing of a certain type of evidence, because culturally it doesn't fit our cultural expectations of what veracity and truth and reliability is, you know. So we even got to get down to the point where we start questioning our own cultural approaches to truth and evidence. What is evidence? Open that up. Yeah, so I guess that's a very quick summary of kind of where we got to, what we've been, the key points to draw out, I think, of her, and it's in the same paragraph, isn't it? The next, it flows over the bit you read, Keiko, about, and the next quotation, we can move on to it. I've asked myself where the critical thinkers in my culture are, in history, in the world of the imagination, and in the present. So, you know, as we know from her story, she, particularly university, kind of woke her. There was a steady awakening to a series of things. And it's an important point for her, I think, where she asks herself, okay, where do I, if I know I don't know some of this stuff, where might I find such people who are critical thinkers? Where are they in my culture? And the question really for discussion is, where might they be, or who might they be? Slightly different. here in Australia, globally, and/or, put an and/or in there, in your native land. So if we are going to sort of become more critical, good to find, I guess this is a question of where's the quality information, quality ideas, and quality critical thinking, or any of those. That's part of critical thinking, is to be able to identify good quality sources. So it could be sources of information, but also even possibly sources of critical thinking. And not necessarily all aspects of critical thinking, but they might demonstrate one particular aspect, one particular strength, or something that, you know, you can see is worthwhile in this respect. So I'm just going to throw that open in a second, but we'll just have a look at it again. You know, ask yourself where the critical thinkers in my culture are. And by my culture, let's interpret that very openly, like this culture here now is all of our culture, isn't it? It's not like my culture is just my culture on my native land. This culture here is your culture. We're all living here. And we'll give Galina a permanent resident stamp, right? Even though she's on the other side. she's an Aussie. Hey? So we include all of us as you know, in Australian culture. So that question there, where are the critical thinkers here? You know, that's one. But there are global critical thinkers. Who are they? And what about in your native country too? You know, this is, can I just point out, this is an ongoing question that you continue to ask yourself. What I just will mention, when I was teaching diploma, after a while I thought, actually a good thing probably to help people is I'll give people a list of, I drew up 3 columns of kind of left and right and center of, well, we had all sorts of things. Journalists, academics, judges, even cartoonists, filmmakers, you know, I made this kind of list and threw it out there and we discussed it. And, you know, this was just my version, and somebody else might have come up with another one. But, you know, if I dug that up now, half of it would be obsolete. That's a useful word. Obsolete, like old and no good.
What do you mean? No
good? Because half those people are either retired, died, or disappeared from public life, and another half, you know, there's a new bunch. And some of them are younger, but some of them are not necessarily. They've just become, you know, a new voice. So it's always changing, and your own knowledge is developing too, isn't it? In if you stay in touch with your native culture, new spokespeople arise. There's new social movement that develops. Like, think of the Me Too movement here, or Black Lives Matter. You know, they've just happened in the last couple of years. Well, there are voices there, and I can think of, you know, people attached to those groups here in Australia whose names I'd have to add to that list, you know. So it's always moving. You're evolving, and the society's evolving. So that question is an ongoing, evolving thing too. The answer to it, I guess, as well. All right. Having said that, any thoughts? Like, I think this is pretty important, like that we, in the landscape, we have, when we're arguing or whatever, we can point to certain key thinkers in these different places. They could be art, you know, we could go back and look at her list too. It's like artists, intellectuals, academics, you know, filmmakers, that kind of list that I was suggesting before, cartoonists, you know. So for you, who are some of these people and where are they? While you have a think
I can
about,
think of one.
yeah, cool.
Maybe Jean knows that recently there's a big news that Gao Xiaosong and Zhao Wei, they all got arrested by the the government. And Gao Xiaosong, he's a very famous guy. He's a singer.
Are
He's
they arrested? No, I don't
I
think
think
so.
so. I mean, they
Totally
disappeared.
erased from the.
Yeah, totally disappear. Yeah.
Yeah.
From the news, from everywhere, all their names got erased from the media, everything. So I'm not sure whether you're familiar with Gao Xiaosong, but I quite like his talk show.
Can Julie, can I
Yeah.
ask you, perhaps, can you type in to the chat
The chat.
opinion version of his name? Because we're not going to probably recognize Chinese characters, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think he has become a American citizen. So he has changed his citizen, and he has been living citizenship. Yeah, he has been living America, I think, for years, and he has been hosting talk show, talks about some political views and things about the factual life that people are having there in USA, and about his point of looking at, but he's not very, how to say, he's not very critical towards communist. Yeah, it's not very critical to Communist Party, but it's a bit objectively compared to what is always how to say, what the voices that you always get from the main media in mainland China. So at that time, yeah, I've got a lot of information from him. I think he's a good critical thinker. He's knowledgeable, but there was a lot of criticism towards him, that he's a betrayer, you know. He changed his citizenship and now he's living in America, of course. And then he's showing he's showing the reality of the life about American people. They're not very bad people, you know, we're all general people. It's not like evil devil people like what we've been thinking about. And he also talks about some history about how America supported China during the war with
Japan, was it? The early
yeah, I think with Japan. Yeah. So anyway, it's something very different from what we can read from the history textbook. So he's a good, I think he's a good critical thinker. He's also very famous singer, very talented. And he got, I don't know whether he has got arrested recently, but he's totally gone disappear. Whether
so
it's related to,
say he's gone silent, or
he's gone silent, disappear, yeah, physically disappear.
But Julie, isn't he physically, he's in America?
Maybe no, I don't know whether recently I think he flies back to China and goes to America, and maybe recently has gone back to China together with Zhao Wei and the other famous singer. They all gone disappear, but it's not because of their celebrity. They've got a lot of money, but maybe they have touched some political things.
Okay, you started a good collocation there. They touched a nerve. They touched a political nerve. You know, very sensitive, that spot. Ouch. So you touch a nerve. Yeah. Right. And you can add anything in there, like touched a political nerve. Yeah. Touched a political nerve. So, right. So he's sort of gone off air, as we would say, because he had a YouTube thing or his own
YouTube
or
YouTube.
Right. Jin, did you said something? Did you say he was on the right or something, or what did you say?
Right.
Oh.
He's center right. His political view is center right.
Right.
In our term, is that center right?
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Just we have to be careful in
yeah.
English there, because I heard you say he's right, and I didn't know whether you meant he's correct.
Political view is center right.
Yeah. So what you have to say is, the way we say it is, he's right wing, right? If you add the wing like a compound noun, he's right wing, or he's on the right.
But it's not that right. Not that right. Not completely right.
Right now. No, but
yeah,
if you say, hang on, right.
But he's a little bit right.
Yeah, but what you need to add on there, if you say not completely right, that means he's not completely correct. You mean he's not completely right wing.
Yeah.
Add the wing bit. He's not completely right wing. Yeah. Hence, right. Hence, therefore, you're saying he's centre right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just to confuse you. Right. Yeah. So, and hence possibly his, right. Well, why has he disappeared? Yeah. The question is, has he gone back to China and he's disappeared? Or has the long arm of the, now what do you call the Chinese intelligence police? Like we have the CIA, Australia has ASIO, ASIS. What's the name of the Chinese agency that works overseas?
Oh.
The spy agency. Anyone know? If you do know, you may not want to say it on Zoom. Or maybe it's so secret nobody knows its name, and there's a good example of silence. Eh?
MSS?
MSS, is it? Ah, okay. Thank you. MSS, right. Yeah, because I've never heard of what it was. Thank you. Maybe the long arm of the MSS have got him in California. But who knows? Yeah, well, interesting question. You can let us know if you find out. Thank you, Jolie. What about others? Any other thoughts on, and this is very broad, isn't it? And commenting on any possible, could be environmental comments, could be political, cultural.
My favourite one.
Mm-hmm.
Philip Adams.
Okay. Yes. All right. Tell us about Philip Adams.
Philip Adams.
Yeah.
Well, he's
is he
still alive.
Is he in Switzerland? The point is, he's an Australian person, isn't he?
Yes.
Yes.
He's an Australian person. Yes. And he's been around for a long, long, long time. And he's an extremely interesting person because I think if I remember right, his education or ground or basic education was very basic. He left school, I think, pretty early.
Yes.
Because he wasn't performing according to what expectations, but his intelligence was way beyond what was expected, actually, and I think that's why he was bored and didn't excel at the normal curriculums all that well. So he's what's that word when somebody knows a lot of words?
When they know a lot of words.
Like English words, like 80,000 words. And
yeah, indeed. Churchill was like that.
It's a specific word.
Anyway, not polyglot, because that's somebody who knows lots of languages, isn't it? Yeah, there might be a word.
He's like
certainly very developed vocabulary. Yeah.
Yes. On Saturday, in one of the newspapers, Australian newspapers, there's a magazine in there, and on the second last page, has a column every Saturday, and he writes stories about all sorts of things, whether it's about climate or Aboriginals or Americans, Australians, about prime ministers, about all sorts of things. He's got a very diverse.
And sometimes the most ordinary thing, isn't it? It's like dogs. He'll write about his own dogs or something, but it's just this most amazing piece of writing. Yeah.
And my challenge is every Saturday, or when I get a chance to read it, is to decipher his convoluted stories.
Right. Good words.
Well, they are so. It makes me every time. It makes me look up my dictionary for lots of words because I just don't know them. And often these words are so precisely describing what he wants to say. And as soon as you understand that word, that sentence or the story makes a lot more sense. He's an interesting person.
Yeah, and he can do extraordinary things with simple words, can't he?
Yeah.
Like I think I have mentioned, like he came out of marketing and he went into advertising after he left school. And he invented slip, slop, slap, which I don't know if you know it, but, in the 70s, the anti-skin cancer thing. So you slip on a shirt, you slap on a hat, and you slip, slop, slap, you slop on your sun cream.
Yeah.
And everybody, certainly in my age and lots of younger, know that it's like a 50-year-old slogan that just went into the culture and stayed there. And he's invented numbers of those. But the most simple words, slip, slop and slap, incredibly creative guy.
So if you ever happen to see an Australian, the Australian newspaper lying around and you find a magazine in there, have a look at the second last page. It's every week he's got a column in there. It's really interesting. Yeah.
It is very interesting. I'm glad he's a good one to mention because there is a list, and we used to use it in the diploma, of the top 40 Australian public intellectuals. And the task was a student would select one and then research them for a term and write an essay on them and give a presentation. So that way, and some of you here did that, we learnt through each other. Someone would present about Philip Adams, somebody would present about Germaine Greer, or Henry Reynolds is another, and that way we learnt quite a lot about Australian culture, and then we'd have quite a discussion afterwards about each one. Now, again, that list has evolved and changed. There'd be new people we'd have to put on the list, some we'd have to take off, But that was determined by a survey of academics at the time. I think it was 2006, so it's a fair while ago. And they were asked, who are the most influential public intellectuals in Australia? Not just academics, but people who influence the broader public. And they got this top 40 list, and he was quite high up in that list. So he's an important guy. He now is an ABC broadcaster, and his show, and I have mentioned, and I'm going to take you there because it is an important source of information. Late Night Live, and you can get it as a podcast. And I would encourage you all to, what I would like to do over the next few weeks and months is introduce you to, some of these resources in Australia that are, I guess more critical or useful, better quality, if you like, than others. Now, hang on, I've lost my... Late Night Live, okay. Just trying, having a bit of a problem sharing this. Basically, he is now a journalist with the ABC, And why am I not? Oh, there it is. His show is this one, Late Night Live. It's on Radio National. You can get it as a podcast anytime. I listen to it a lot when I've got to drive for about 5 hours tomorrow. I'll probably put on Late Night Live podcasts and just listen to lots. It's usually that or the science show or something I listen to. Just as an example, now at the moment, Jonathan Green, Philip Adams is not there at the moment. He's on holiday. He's pretty sick actually. He's an old fellow now. He's in his 80s and he's actually quite sick. So Jonathan Green has stepped in and doesn't quite have the charisma that Philip Adams has got. But this show, you know, probably soon Philip Adams will be back. I have not heard that he's off completely. I think I would have heard that. It'd be big news. But you can see quite a variety of topics. Now that's about Aboriginal people, managing rock art. You know, this is about the Taliban, September the 11th. Somebody who denies science. That'd be an interesting, you know, critical thinking one to have a look at. Denying COVID and climate change, etc. It's, yeah, even Suharto, the dictator of Indonesia for many years. And there's a weekly update by this guy, Bruce Shapiro from the US, and there's another guy who gives an update from the United Kingdom. Now you can go back and look at past programs. The main point of it is anybody probably, it's usually professors. Most of these people are professors of history or culture or language or politics or whatever, climate. And they've put out a book, so it's a high quality book, and they then get interviewed by Philip Adams. And he's done something like 10 years ago, he'd done 20,000 interviews. So he's probably done about 30,000 by now, something like that, 25, 30,000. And he's got an extraordinary memory. So he just remembers all this stuff that he can then use in the next interview. You know, so he's a very good interviewer and funny as well. Some people from a non-English background have said that they find him a bit hard to listen to because he's got a very kind of soft, a bit of a mumbly voice. I would say stick with him, and it's like anybody, you kind of get used to the voice because it really is gold, this show. This program, some years ago, there was a survey of the ABC. How many downloads? Which show got the most downloads? This show got 2/3 of all the downloads of all the ABC shows, right? And one of the main reasons it did is because it's international. If you look at the topics, you can see that, can't you? 9/11, Taliban, September 11th, you know, climate denying. A lot of this is international. Not all of them. We've got, you know, some Indigenous stuff and there are Australian voices here, but, you know, Indonesia, etc. You can look back at, you know, years of these things and listen to them. And the level, I think you find it will be at your level, accessible and comprehensible. But if you make that part of your regular diet, I would, you know, just the level of information and keeping up with the latest developments in a whole series of areas, it's really one of the best shows you can get. Philip Adams is just one part of a team. You know, the production team, he doesn't necessarily decide who gets interviewed and so on. It's the producer often who does that. But the whole production team and him do this really amazing job. I mean, the ABC is under attack and it's being interpenetrated by hostile elements and all kinds of wars around the ABC, just like there are wars around history, left to right. There are wars around the ABC, left to right. Okay, it's not a static thing. But the ABC has sort of, you know, Late Night Live rather, has maintained its quality, I think, in the midst of that. And it really is a resource that I'd recommend as critical thinkers. Basically what you'll hear is interviews with a whole lot of different, you know, people thinking critically about a whole lot of stuff. And then you can chase those people and download their books or buy them or whatever. just on Heinz, you were talking about his magazine. Yes, basically the Australian newspaper, as you said, in the Saturday version, you get the glossy magazine. Yeah, I often go off. Luckily, I live in the city, and the public library is about 100 metres away. So I go there, and the only thing I ever go to that library for is that page. Yeah, but his page. Yeah. I don't read the rest. Yeah. It's all full of wine reviews and all the rest. All the other bunkum, slang, rubbish. Bunkum. Yeah, so it's really worthwhile. He's very creative user of the language, one of the most creative in the country as a journalist. I'd say in terms of non-fiction writer, of course, in fiction we see this incredible creativity, you know, poetry and novels and so on. But in non-fiction, some people are creative, you know, in varying degrees. And I'm just thinking, even globally, like in English, he would be one of the most creative non-fiction essayists. You know, he writes these little essays of about, I guess they're about 300, 400 words, aren't they? 400, 500 maybe, every week. And they are little masterpieces, a lot of them. They really are extraordinary. He will take bits of classical poems and reverse the metaphor. Yeah. And you won't know, unless you know that poem, you know, you won't know that's happening. But because of this accumulated knowledge with all these people, and he's read most of he reads these books that he interviews, you know, you can tell he's actually read them because of his penetrating questions. He has sometimes written about his library, and he's actually had to build extra rooms on his house to fit the bookshelves, to take all the books. He's got about 30,000 books or something. And he's read probably just about all of them. So he makes reference, you know, all this stuff and yeah, very, very clever, all sorts of techniques. Now, I grew up year 11 and 12 when he was a much younger journalist, of course. He was writing in that magazine back then. So he's been writing it for like 40, 50 years. And in year 11 and 12, all of the English teachers used to give all of the classes the weekly Phillip Adams piece. As relatively high level senior students, we'd have to study this stuff and, you know, dissect it and talk about the literary technique that he was using. Was it onomatopoeia? Was it alliteration? Was it personification? You know, were there similes, blah, blah. And we'd analyse Phillip Adams, which was great fun because he's very funny as well. He's a good comedian. So it was never a task, a dull task. So yeah, he's important for a whole lot of reasons, you know, linguistically, kind of, yeah, in a literary sense, as a journalist, and even as a producer. He was the guy in the early 70s who kicked off he established, together with Gough Whitlam, the Australian Film Commission, which was about the government making very low interest loans and in some cases actual donations to get Australian films started. So they could, you know, spend $2 million and then get it back at the box office and pay the government back. But if they didn't get that initial injection, they could never get started because films are expensive. So the Whitlam period, 1972-75, I've said before, very key in creating, again, back to the silences thing, many of those voices, you know, giving money to Aboriginal people, giving money to migrant communities, giving money to women, these silenced voices to make films and express those voices, you know, and to show their circumstances and their issues, and with an Australian voice. So Phillip Adams was key, and he was the head of the Australian Film Commission for a long time. So he's deeply involved in Australia's cultural development and cultural life. So he's a very interesting person to associate yourself with and just get to know through his current program. And even if you go into Oxfam Bookshop, look under A. Adams, every now and again, he hasn't done it for years. I haven't seen it one for more than 20 years, maybe even 30. collected the best articles from the Saturday papers. He used to collect and print, and you can get old copies, back to the 80s and 90s. So there are books and articles by him. So I would recommend him very strongly as a person to get to know Australian culture, but also this program as a good source of critical, I guess, relatively good quality information. Yeah, so I did spend a bit of time on him, but I think he's an important one. Any others? I mean, one thing we will do is, as we talk and discuss and we touch on something, the ones I know about from here and sometimes internationally, I'll try to throw in, and if they inspire you, chase them and explore them. So it'll be an ongoing. Clive James, Jin, yes, thank you. Tell us about Clive, Jin. Just unmute, please. Good.
He died like 2019, in 2019, yeah. He was a writer, TV broadcaster, and critic and poet. Poets, yes. But I only read one article. Yes.
Yeah, he was. Sorry.
I think you turned it off now.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get you up on the screen, Jin. Tell us more about him, what you know, Jin, while I try to.
Yeah, he's a writer. Yeah, and TV broadcaster and critic.
Yes.
Points. Yeah, and he's very famous in Essex. But I only read one article from his book, Reliable Access. Only one article.
We're back.
Yeah.
Got you back on the screen. Good. Yeah, no, Clive James is quite an important figure.
Yeah, and that article is talking about 1984.
As in George Orwell's 1984.
Yes.
Okay.
So and then I was thinking, if I want to understand this asset, I have to read 1984 first, and then I come back. And after I read 1984, I never come back. But I think he's good.
Yeah, right. So, Jin, you're mentioning 1984 there. Who wrote 1984?
Let me.
He is really worth, again, any critical thinker, as we say, worth their salt. Any critical thinker of any quality. If you're worth your salt, why salt? Because salt was the salary in the Roman times. Salary. So if you're worth your salt, you're worth your salary. So any critical thinker who is worth it has read and knows George Orwell. He's a very important figure. So yes, George Orwell, 1984, definitely an absolute milestone in 20th century in terms of literature and politics. An Animal Farm, probably perhaps more, Animal Farm.
Yes.
The animals who rebel against the farmer. And then we see Galina's favorite person, the sort of Stalinization of the revolution, don't we?
3 favorite persons. They are still very popular. And Ukrainian speaking.
Sorry, Galina, something's cut out there. Your sound's cut out. No. Can anyone else hear Galina? We've lost you, Galina.
I think maybe it's her devices. I can't hear her either.
Maybe of this microphone.
That's better. That's better. So can we rewind you about a minute and just you were talking about 3 people. No, we've lost you again. Something else, something gone silent again.
As they do this.
Yeah, yes.
And
now nothing.
Nothing at all?
Yeah, now good.
Now good. I have 3 popular, no, 3 people whom I listen to them regularly, but they all are Russian and Ukrainian speaking journalists.
Right.
I think that you never even heard their surnames, but they help me to understand a lot in the world around. But I got my critical thinking by life, because when I came to Australia, I started to compare, of course, automatically do this, to compare life here and there. And then in 2014, after this Russian invasion, my mind turned dramatically.
Upside down.
Upside down, yes. I never heard that it can happen with me. I never heard that I can think that Russians are my enemies. I also always think that we are brothers, sisters, relatives, friends, whatever. But now, no. And it doesn't matter. I don't need to read some articles or listen to someone. No, I see what's going on. And that's it. It's, for me, it's enough. I don't need anyone's suggestion how to think, what is my point of view. I see what's going on, and that's it. It's enough.
So, Galina, can I ask those you said 3 people, 2 of them are Russian, are they?
2 of them are Russian, yes.
Right,
and one is
so there's been that split that you talked about. So those 2 Russian journalists, despite the fact they're Russian, you're still following them because they've got a different attitude. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And one of them is just a politician, and another, she is a scientist journalist. How to explain? She reads a lot of scientist articles and compare them in her topics, and she explains a lot about, for example, COVID-19, about this global warming. It's interesting.
Right, we would say a scientific journalist, or even just a science journalist. A science journalist.
Yeah, like that.
Right.
Yeah, and it's
does
very
this stuff ever get translated into English?
I will check. If I can find something in English, I'll send you, because it's very interesting to listen to her. She has a very controversial point of view. When she talks about global warming, it's so interesting to listen to her, because she has a lot of evidence, historical evidence, and it's very controversial. And I think that it's interesting to hear, to listen to her, to know her point of view, to make your point of view.
Yeah, right.
It's very interesting. And about this Australian society, a lot of pros and cons. And when I observe this, when I listen to authorities, when they start their speeches about something, at anywhere, at schools, at unis, anywhere, first sentence is about this Aboriginal land that they respect and acknowledge and blah, blah, blah. It's so hypocrisy. It's so
hypocritical. You need the adjective.
It's so hypocritical. Yes, for me, it's like words, and these words they don't cost anything. They, I cannot hear this. All my nation is against. You say one word and doing completely opposite, and it's very. I don't understand this at all.
Yes, you may have the same saying, other people, but in English we say words are cheap. It's easy to say stuff, isn't it? It's harder.
Yes.
Harder to enact.
Don't understand what's for. I don't understand what's for.
Yeah, I don't understand what it's for. Yeah.
What is for? What is
well, if you can find some translations, that would be interesting. You could send them perhaps to the. We may need to create a little subgroup once we know who's sort of in the group for the long term, and we could post stuff, or you could even post it to the Tandanyanga group. Why not? You know, if anyone this question, let's leave it ongoing, and if you do have any thinker, author, writer, such public intellectual, you know, who occurs to you, oh yeah, that person, send us the link, and you know, because we are global now, aren't we? Really, and a lot of what's getting discussed, you know, I think it's going to be useful that we go beyond Australia to learn what people are saying about all sorts of places. Can I just finish by, I'll try to dash through some English points that have come up through discussion. Just that expression, upside down. My brain turned upside down. I got critical thinking. You need from life. You get something from. You get, I'll put CT, from, just prepositions. I use that word, slang word, bunkum, equals rubbish. Like it's spoken rubbish, not rubbish that you throw out in the bin. Spoken rubbish. Oh, that's bunkum, like bullshit, but it's much more polite. Hypocritical is your adjective. I'll put hypocrisy as the noun, like the more abstract noun. And then you have hypocrite, who I think that one is more well known, the person. So say one thing, do another. Just to spell the person, whoops, Philip Adams is the person we were talking about earlier, just to spell his name there. Heinz, you had some nice words. Did you get them from Philip Adams? Maybe convoluted. Yeah, convoluted is very twisted. Convoluted stories, yeah. So a story that's got lots of twists and turns in it, very involved, convoluted story. And the other word you said was a good one, decipher, is like to decode a secret. A cipher here means, well, it can mean like a number, but here it's more got the sense of it's a secret that you're unpacking. Touched a nerve. We've done, I think, Julie, you might have said a betrayer. You felt like a betrayer, sorry. We tend to say traitor rather than betrayer. We use the verb betray, but somebody who betrays is a traitor rather than betrayer. Collocation, I think you said the main media. Let's just put a stream on the end of that. Mainstream media, Channel 9, 7, 10, etc. Advertiser, right? The word I used, obsolete. Something is obsolete, old, unused. So, oh, that computer, obsolete now, doesn't carry any modern software. Be careful of this one. A big news, no, right? And big, maybe not. So let's change it to just important news, and notice no article for news. No indefinite article. A news, you cannot have it. You can't have 4 newses. You have 4 pieces of news I need to tell you. Right? So we can often say piece. I guess we could say, oh, I've got a big, you could say this, you could speak that, a big piece of news. If you put piece of in front of uncountables, it often solves the problem. And there was, this one's interesting and a good critical thinking one. Singular, we have a point of view. If we want to say, there are several people with several of these, do we put the S there? No, we have to put it here, don't we? Yeah, so we have several points of view. That's how we pluralize a point of view. My point of view, all of our points of view. Just to get that clear. So there's just some things that came up. See you, Cole. And I will save that and can send it out in the email if you like as well in a minute or later on. All right, well, we got through a couple of questions. That's all right. We'll take it if you're happy with that sort of pace, and because it's nice to hear from everybody. And thank you for your contributions. And yeah, we will see you next week.
See you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chase some of those people if they
Bye.
sounded interesting to you. I hope
Bye
they did.
bye. Thank you very much.
No worries. And we will see you next time. Ciao.
Thank you, John. See
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank